It's pretty obvious you guys are not just five guys sitting there together. Like there's a real brotherhood.
I think you're dead on that there's a brotherhood. It genuinely is family with us. Jay's best man at my wedding. So when you see us on the air, we do those kinds of things and laugh with each other, make fun of each other. It is genuine because we really do like one another. I mean, if I showed you our text chain, HR would probably fire all of us.
Welcome in. It is the Tuesday, December 31 edition of the NFL Spotlight Show, the final episode of 2024. We are entering week 18, the final week of the NFL regular season, and a lot of ramifications. It is about to get insanely busy around the NFL, of course, with the playoffs, with the final playoff scenarios, and of course, all those teams around the NFL who will be making coaching changes and potentially front office changes that will be coming up over here next week. We will talk about that here tomorrow on the episode. But since it is a Tuesday, we are going to have a special guest like we do every single week. And today we will be joined by Fox NFL Sunday host Curt Menefee, who has been on the desk since 2006, the full-time host since 2007, and it is the number one pregame show ever since, every single year, year in and year out. And Curt has been doing it with Jimmy Johnson and Jay Glazer and Michael Strahan and Howie Long and Terry Bradshaw. Those guys have been on it forever. It is the most entertaining pregame show, and it's truly just a bunch of friends who are like family, who are talking about football, and it is very entertaining and informative. And Curt has been there for many, many years. The show is in the Hall of Fame, and his journey to getting there is a fascinating one, and we talked about all of it here on the episode with Curt. We will talk about some other NFL things going on around the league here on the back end of the show. But for now, here is my full discussion with Fox NFL Sunday host Curt Menefee. Joining us today here on NFL Spotlight, he is the longtime host of Fox NFL Sunday. It has been for years and years the number one pregame show. He's also the co-anchor of Good Day New York. He's done play-by-play. He's also the author of Losing Isn't Everything. It is the great Curt Menefee. Curt, thank you so much for coming on. How's everything going?
Good, Ari. I appreciate it. How are things in your world?
I am doing good. We're here into December, the stretch run of the NFL season. It is always great. And like I told you before, this is the NFL Spotlight Show. We love to spotlight people around the NFL who deserve more recognition. And Curt, I think most people know you from Fox, but the journey that you had was a long one, and it took you many different places. And I really want to get into all of it because I don't think the average fans really know about all of it. And, you know, you were born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. You went to school in Iowa. I'm just curious to hear from you, like, what first drew you to TV? Did you always want to end up in sports? Was football always the goal? How did this career start for Curt Menefee?
Well, I mean, it goes back to, being a kid growing up in Georgia. Like most kids that grow up, you want to be a professional athlete when you're young. And growing up in Georgia, I wanted to be a football player because that's what you do when you grow up in Georgia. And so when I was 15 years old, I blew out my knee in high school, which anyone who watches Fox NFL Sunday knows the guys give me a hard time about my middle school career and how great I must have been. But I had the knee injury, and it forced me at the age of 15 to kind of think, okay, I'm not going to be a professional athlete. I mean, look, realistically now I know that there was zero chance, or not zero, but less than 1% chance. But it forced you to be realistic at a young age. So at that point, I decided, well, what do I want to do? And I knew I wanted to be around sports in some capacity. I thought I wanted to be maybe a sports photographer, camera guy, maybe a producer. Didn't really know what producers did, but you're a young man and you're thinking about what you could do. So I knew I wanted to do something around the world of sports, and wound up going to Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which had no journalism program at the time, no television station, not even a campus radio station. So it's one of those decisions you make when you're 17 years old. You're like, why would you choose that? Fred Hickman, who did sports at CNN back then, had gone to Coe College. I was looking at it because I wanted to go to a small school away from home. And he told me just about the opportunities that he got there working at local stations rather than going the traditional journalism school route. And that kind of intrigued me. And so it kind of started there. I wound up going to Coe. When I went back to Atlanta the summer after my freshman year, interned at CNN. Fred Hickman helped me get an internship there. Went back that fall, called up all the local stations and said, hey, I interned at CNN. I'm willing to do anything. And I had learned how to edit because I would hang out with the editors late at night because it was a non-union shop and you could play around with all the equipment and not get in trouble. But that was all I really knew how to do. And so one guy just called me back 4 months later, said, hey, I just need someone to carry gear. The University of Iowa game, you don't get to be on TV. You don't get to be famous. I'm like, I don't care. I don't want to do that anyway. So I did that. And he said, well, can you carry gear next week, the Iowa State game? And I go, sure. And it was that time he asked me, John Campbell, and I keep in touch with him to this day. He's long retired. But whenever I go back to Cedar Rapids every year, I'm on the board there at Coe College. So I go back every year for board meetings and I make sure we get together for breakfast or dinner or something. But anyway, he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't know. I want to be in television somehow. And he brought me on board and kind of started out as an internship there. And then he said, well, why don't you take the highlights that we do at night and put your voice down on tape? And I did that. And unbeknownst to me, he took it to the news director. And by the middle of my sophomore year in college, I was reporting on like local high school sports and small college sports. And it just kind of bloomed from there. And so it was one of those things I had to be at the right place at the right time and have someone put their arm around me and say, hey, let me try and help you figure out what your dream is before even chasing your dream.
Well, the one thing we've learned here from the show, from many different guests, whoever it is, whether it's player, coach, executive, media person, producer, we've had many different people, is that it is a relationships business at the end of the day. And once you get to know people, eventually it takes you many different places. I'm curious just to hear, like, was the goal always to be in sports in general? Was it always football? What was the goal?
No, it was just, I wanted to do sports. I love sports. And, when I was a kid, football was probably my second favorite sport behind baseball. I love baseball. So I'm a fan of all sports,
Right.
and was then too. But obviously, football is giving me a great life, as Bono once said. And so I'm really happy about that. But I'm still a big sports fan. But no, I just wanted to be involved in sports somehow. But you talk about it being a relationship business. I think it's also one that it's not just about relationships going up. It's relationships, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but looking down as well, looking at people that really can't help you, and making sure you help them, because somewhere along the way, I don't care who you are, whatever position you've gotten to, if you've had any success in your life, someone has helped you get there along the way. And it may be guiding you, or it may be getting you out of trouble somewhere else, whatever it is. But you always have to remember that. And when there's someone else who's kind of trying to figure out that way or want to come along, reaching back and then trying to pull them along as well. And I think that's something that's really important. And to me, those types of relationships are just as important as those when you're going forward, because so many people get wrapped up in trying to climb the ladder. And who can I get to know who's in this position and what can they do for me? It's okay for you to get to that position or whatever that position is in life and say, hey, let me try and help somebody else get to their position where they want to be, even if it means they pass me someday,
Yeah, it's I think you were once on with Dan Patrick and you actually mentioned that where, we might be doing the same thing, but at the end of the day, we all love each other. And I think that is a
Mm-hmm.
very, very big note as well. What was your big break when it came to getting to Fox Sports? 'Cause I know you did some baseball for them. I know you did some play-by-play for them.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you got to the desk, but what was that big break where you finally got into the national stage?
Well, I think the whole thing really came down to, I'm back here in New York, coincidentally, at the same Fox station where I started with Fox back in 1995, so almost 30 years ago, doing sports on the 10 o'clock news. I was 29 years old when I got here, doing sports and, just like on your local news, running down the highlights, Yankees, Mets, etc. And I was doing that, and I'd been here for 2 years at that point. So it was 1997. And Fox called me up and said, hey, have you ever done play-by-play? I go, nope. I'd only done the newscasts as a sports guy. And they said, well, we've got NFL Europe. And Fox was running all the production for it, which is why you see, I'm sure you know that Rich Russo, who's the director for the Super Bowls. I'm trying to think, every announcer at Fox pretty much who came out of that era, and Kevin Harlan and Ian Eagle and those guys kind of got started doing NFL Europe. And so it was an opportunity for me as well. And so I went over there and I did one game with Brian Baldinger in 1997 in Amsterdam. And then they said, okay, we'll send you back next year. I went back the next year in 98, did 2 games. And then that following fall, Baldy and I, Brian Baldinger, they gave us a partial schedule. We did 7 NFL games that fall, and then in '99 did a full NFL schedule. I was there until I moved into the studio in 2006. But it was being at the Fox affiliate here in New York, already doing sports, when Fox reached out and said, "Hey, maybe there's some other roles here for you." And that grew as time went on, because I was fortunate enough to be here when the Yankees were winning World Series titles. They won those 4 and 5 years. And so I would do the dugout and the sideline interviews and those kinds of things during those. Back then, they didn't have full-time reporters on the sidelines with each NFL crew. So I would do sidelines when the Giants or Jets were the home team. So I started having a relationship with them, and I think that's why they came and said, well, maybe there's some other things you could do. So the relationship really, though, started because I was doing sports on the local Fox station.
So how did that opportunity in '06 come to getting to the desk and being there with, it was Jimmy, there was Howie, there was Terry. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was the 4. And I think you were flip-flopping with Joe Buck a lot, which I don't think fans remember. But how did that
Yeah.
opportunity come along?
Yeah. So again, I was, had been doing games for Fox at that point for, 9 seasons, NFL seasons. And so then going at the end of the 2005 season, the NFC Championship game that year, James Brown announced he was leaving to go to CBS and host their pregame show. So Fox was like, okay, well, we got to figure out who's going to replace him. Obviously, they knew I had desk experience, but there were multiple people they brought in for auditions and interviews and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, well, don't they know us all? You know how this business goes. So they want to sit people down. And I auditioned with Terry, and as did everyone. And I know they brought in numerous people. And so that summer, what they decided to do was that Joe Buck he was still our number one guy, and he was doing the games with Troy, that Joe and Troy, wherever they were for that number one game, we would take it kind of, college game day style or big noon kickoff now, and go on the road with those guys. Joe Buck would host the first 45 minutes, and I would do the last 15 minutes while he raced up to the booth, and then I would do all the half times. And then the post game just depended on, did Joe get back down in time? If he didn't, then Curt would do it. If he did, then Joe would do it. And it was an interesting scenario that I think was rough on a lot of people. So we did that the first year. And after that, they said, we're going back to the studio. Curt, you're the guy. Joe, you're going on the road. And I think that kind of settled the thing there. But, part of it is, I wondered at the time, and look, knock on wood, it's worked out for me. I was doing the 4th, 5th, 6th game at that point for Fox. So, that studio show, it had been the number one show for 12 years. I think that maybe they thought there may have been a little bit of risk in taking a guy who was doing regional games, what we call the milk games, because you're going to like 2% of the country, like definitely low fat. So, but taking that person and sticking them in the studio on a high profile show that was already number one, whereas Joe, being the number one broadcaster at Fox, had an identity. You could put him there. And so it kind of worked as a transition year where Joe was there, but I was also on the show. So people got a chance to see me work with the other guys, get to know me a little bit. And then when the transition became full-time, Joe went back to being full-time play-by-play. And then I became the full-time guy in the studio. So, no one's ever said that to me, but I always wondered that. So.
I mean, I don't think fans really remember those days where it was you and Joe. And I think Chris
Yeah.
was also a 3-man booth with Troy Aikman, which was a weird
That
thing.
first year, yeah.
Yeah. So those days at Fox were interesting. But you mentioned it, '07, you become the full-time guy. I'm just curious to hear from you about the relationship with Howie and Jimmy and Terry, and eventually
Mm-hmm.
Michael comes in after that '07 season. It's pretty obvious you guys are not just 4 guys sitting there, 5 guys sitting there together. Like, there's a real brotherhood. When did you guys really feel like that? Was it from the start right away? And like, what is it like around all those guys?
I think you're dead on that there's a brotherhood. It genuinely is family with us. We know each other's spouses, their kids. Chris Long, little Howie, as we call him, who's now a 30-something-year-old man who's married. Kyle Long. We knew them when they were in high school and grade school. So those relationships go way back. But for me, Michael and Jay predate my being on the pregame show. I got to know Terry and Howie, and Jimmy sort of did because I worked in Dallas while Jimmy, his last 2 years, was the head coach of the Cowboys. So I knew Jimmy. We didn't have a relationship. I was a local guy. He was the coach of the team. But I knew Jimmy a little bit then. But those three guys I got to know when I got put on the pregame show in 2006. And that was one of the great things that did come out of that road year, because anybody who's traveled with a crew on the road or coworkers, you have dinners. You sit around, you watch college football together. You have a couple of adult beverages together, and you really get to know each other in ways that you will never know if all you did was go back and forth and work in the studio or work in your office. So I think that was instrumental in them getting to know me and me getting to know them. As far as Jay, when I was a local guy in New York, Jay was writing for the Free Giants weekly newspaper. And Jay would have to beg people for rides back and forth to get out to New Jersey because he didn't have a car. So, I mean, like, I knew Jay's best man at my wedding. So, like, I'd known Jay forever. Michael, his second year in the league was my first year in New York. And so I knew Michael, and back then, like, his ex-wife tried to set me up with her sister. Like, we've had relationships that go beyond just being inside a studio. So when you see us on the air and we do those kinds of things and laugh with each other and make fun of each other, it is genuine because we really do like one another. I mean, if I showed you our text chain, HR would probably fire all of us, but it's a year-round thing. It's not just football. I was talking about Holly's wife and my wife. They were on the phone 2 days ago planning what they were doing for the Super Bowl. I mean, so our families get along. It's a real familial relationship amongst all of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to see whenever watching you guys. It's just five friends,
Yeah.
including Jay as well, where we're talking football and having fun, and that's why it's been the number one show for a long time. When
I
Michael
tell people
came
it's
in,
the same thing we do on Saturday when we watch college football together,
yeah,
except there's no swearing and no adult beverages. Otherwise, it's the same thing.
I love it. I want to ask you about when Michael came in, because that was, of course, the year before he won the Super Bowl with the Giants. When did you guys know that Michael was coming and joining you guys? And that entire year with the Giants, where everyone doubted them, did you guys already know he was coming? And were you guys in contact with him throughout that season and how the magical run all happened?
Well, now that I'm trying to do math, 16 years down the road, whatever, 17 years down the road, uh, some of us knew and some didn't.
Okay.
So, I in part because I had a relationship with Michael before, Fox came to me and said, "Hey, we've already signed Michael. He's going to play." They thought one more year, but who knew? Play one more year. But why don't you go back and forth to New York and why don't you guys just spend more time together and just talk about this? So I had a couple of trips that, because I was living in Los Angeles at the time. And so I would come to New York and we would talk about the show and that kind of thing, but basically we just got them to pay for me to come to New York and have dinner with my buddy. So, so it kind of worked out that way, but not everybody on the show knew until that season was done and Michael announced it. So it was a semi-hidden secret. But I mean, I think that, I talked about the relationships that we all have, and David Hill, who was CEO and president of Fox Sports at that time, he's retired now. Eric Shanks is in that position. But David, I think the best thing he was a chemist. Like, he understood the chemistry of what it took to make that show work and the people that it took to make that show work. Because I know that along the way, there were other people that were presented by people from other places at Fox, I'll say it that way, and said, hey, this person would be great because if you could sign them, then we can have them do these kind of things for us. And it just wasn't the right fit. And so it was one of those things that they just waited it out. And like, if we're going to add someone else, it's going to be the right person. And Michael was. I mean, I think it's been clear, obviously, now, but you knew it way back then from day one that he was the kind of guy, okay, if we're going to expand the desk and add a fifth person, then he's the guy. So, and I think that is one of the things that not everybody gets, because so many places just go, okay, who's the biggest name out there who retired this year, and let us hire that person. And, and it doesn't mean that person is right or wrong. Sometimes it's about fit.
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect fit, and I think winning the
Hmm.
Super Bowl and who they beat was just the cherry on top for all of it,
And the way it happened.
and the way it happened as well. So I want to ask you about just you've been doing this show for a long time now. After all these years of doing this show, I'm sure there are many, but are there any moments that stand out the most to you, ones that you look back on eventually and think that was truly, truly special?
Yeah, to me, it's not even a close second. When Jimmy found out he
Agree.
was going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, that is one moment that I think it's the best moment in the history of Fox Sports. Fox Sports has been around 31 years now. I don't think anything else comes close to that. And to be a part of that was so cool. That was another one where not everybody on the show knew. As a matter of fact, I was the only person on air who knew. And I'd been told that week because we had some preparation to do. And so the director of the show didn't even find out until that morning, because it was supposed to be that morning. And our producer knew, and Eric Shanks, who's our president. That was it. The four of us that day, before that day, three of us, Shanks, Bill Richards, who's our producer, and myself. And so the plan was, if you go back to that weekend, Bill Cowher got in they announced it on Saturday on CBS's pregame show. And so Jimmy was a candidate, and, we were with him watching college football on Saturday. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great, blah, 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 blah. So Jimmy in his mind was like, okay, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen Sunday morning on our pregame show. Well, we did our pregame show on the Sunday morning, but the playoff game that was on before us on CBS ran long. So the powers that be decided, you know what, let's not waste this on a pregame show where the majority of the audience is watching a live game, which is understandable. Let's save this and do it at halftime it was a Seattle Green Bay playoff game. Let's do it at halftime of the game. So when it didn't happen on the pregame show, Jimmy just naturally assumed, well, another year I'm not going in. And he tried to pretend, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. But you could tell. I mean, you know how it is when you know people. And so he was a little bit down. He really was. So he thought, well, it's not going to happen. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh boy. So part of you wants to put your arm around your friend and say, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. But if you do that, then you're kind of giving away the secret. So I had to sit there and watch, and so did Bill Richardson, Eric Shanks, and just kind of let it play out. So when we went back out to do the halftime highlights in between that game, and I remember they had Troy and Joe. They didn't even tell them. They just said, hey, we want you to watch the studio show because something we're going to talk about, you guys may want to talk about in the second half. So, but they put a camera on Troy, and I remember Troy started crying when he saw it. But it was one of those moments when David Baker walked out, to the surprise of everyone. Like Jimmy, we thought he was going to pass out. Like it was such an emotional moment because he's a guy who pretends he's the gruff, mean old guy, who's born in the 50s, and I don't need anybody born in the 40s. I don't need you young whippersnappers telling me about my emotions. But it meant so much to him, and it meant so much to all of us who knew him because we knew that it did. And that was just a great moment to be a part of, just to be there and witness it in person. That's something I will never, ever forget. And I don't think anything will ever come close to it.
I mean, just getting the shot of Troy at the stadium in Green Bay was just so perfect. And everything about that. I mean, I think there's a point where Terry says, do you need the shot? I think because he was getting, you remember that?
Jimmy has asthma.
Right.
And so Jimmy has an inhaler that he keeps with him. And so that's what Terry meant was like, do you need your inhaler? Because we seriously, you could tell he was getting choked up. And we're like, is he going to pass out? And we're looking around, all right, well, who's going to give him mouth to mouth? And everybody starts shrinking at that point. But it was genuine emotion that poured out. And it's so rare to see in TV that kind of emotion be real. And I think that's what meant so much to so many people.
No, it was very genuine, and it was one of the best moments in TV history. You said Fox history. I would definitely agree with that. But speaking of the Hall of Fame, you guys went into the National Association Broadcast Hall of Fame in 2019. What did that mean to you and the rest of the crew for you guys to get that honor?
Well, I get to say I'm in a Hall of Fame now. All the other guys are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So I get to brag about that. But no, that honor, we're the only sports show still that's in there, and then the National Television Hall of Fame. I mean, that's, MASH and Seinfeld and classic, I Love Lucy shows that people have been talking about for 50, 60 years and will talk about for another 50, 60 years. And so to be the only sports show so enshrined, is something that obviously is, I don't know if you can even put into words, and I know that's what we're supposed to be able to do for a living, but there are certain things that happen to you in life that you just go, God, I can't believe that. I often use the 8-year-old me analogy. It's like when something happens to me, I go, if I told the 8-year-old me that I get paid for a living to watch football games, I think that's made up. If I told the 8-year-old me that I'd be in the Television Hall of Fame with all these iconic shows, I would think that is BS. You know what I mean? And so there's just so many things that I've been so fortunate that have happened to me in my life. And, look, we all work hard, or so many of us work hard. And a lot of hard work was put into it, and, a lot of pulling cables in the snow in Iowa, and being unemployed for a while, and so many things that when you have moments like that, you look back and you look at the journey that you've been able to uh, make at that point and where it is, and hope that it keeps going and whatever the next step is. But it is one of those things. And again, it sounds like a cliche, but you remember all the people that kind of helped you along the way. I remember that I hadn't thought about putting my voice down on tape. John Campbell said, "Why don't you try to do this?" If Fred Hickman hadn't helped me get an internship at CNN, I wouldn't have been able to go back to John Campbell and say, "Hey, I interned at CNN when I was here in New York." Before getting to New York, I was in Dallas, and Lisa Gregorius Dempsey, who was the news director at the Fox station in Dallas, I was at what's now the CBS station, Channel 11. She hit me up and she was like, "Why don't you come over here and do sports?" And I'm like, I don't know. A year later, she says, "I'm in New York. You want to come to New York and do sports for me?" I mean, like, that's someone who could have just blown me off after I said no one time, but it's followed my career and helped me out. And, so I just remember all of those people and all the sacrifices and that people have made along the way for me just as a human being. Forget that. I mean, I grew up a poor kid in Atlanta, and, we got evicted from homes and moved to different family members, or, slept in cars for a while, and like those kind of things. You're like, man, it took a lot to get here. And I don't ever forget that. I really don't. People see your life and they see where you are today. And it's not just me. I'm not saying that, but you can be a musician, an athlete, or an actor, and they see where you are and they just assume that you just kind of got there. Nobody knows your journey like you do, but there's so much work and so many people that help you get from point A to point B and from B to C that you're selfish if you don't look back and reflect on them and the impact they've had on you many times in your life. And that's something I try to do on a regular basis.
It's amazing to hear all that. I really wanted to ask you about just, I feel like it all kind of came full circle for you now because you mentioned that you're back in New York. I was always
Hmm.
amazed that Michael Strahan does the back and forth trip from LA to New York because he does Good Morning America. Lo and behold, in January, you announced that you're going to be the new co-anchor of Good Day New York with Rosanna Scotto, who I'm from New York. She's a legend here. And I think you crossed paths with her early on as well.
Yeah, we were both she was doing the news at 10 o'clock and I was doing sports.
Right. So there. So you guys have crossed paths earlier on, but how did that happen? Were there any second thoughts about doing this? 'Cause I guess it is a full circle thing for you, but
Yeah.
again, the LA to New York element, like it's not easy.
Yeah. No, no, and you talk about sacrifice. My
Yeah.
wife, I mean, we live in Santa Barbara. And so she's still there full time. I'm here in New York during the week. I go back right after the show on Fridays. Now I'm home for like 20 hours. And by the time I get home, I get there Friday evening. We spend Friday night together. Saturday, I head down to LA to get ready for the football show. So she's made so many sacrifices. But the way it came about was that Fox came to me, and they were just looking at updating the show here in New York with Rosanna. And they said, "I know it's crazy, but would you consider going there and doing Good Day New York?" And I'm like, "We just finished remodeling out. So we've been out of our house for a year. We actually even weren't back into it. This was last fall. We hadn't even gotten back into the house because we got back the week of Thanksgiving." And I'm like, "No, I don't think so." And I talked to my wife right after the phone call, and she goes, "Well, you're crazy if you don't at least have the conversation. See where it goes. You never know where it goes. And you can always say no again, but you'll regret it if you get down the road and say, well, maybe I should have explored that a little bit more." And the more we talked, the more it made sense. And as my wife said, "Look, we can survive anything for a little while, and we'll do it, and we'll see how it goes and go from there." So it was one of those opportunities that once it came to me, and why not? I've always been a news junkie. I love the entertainment aspect of it. Tomorrow we've got Martha Stewart on the show. We've had singers, entertainers, authors, but people that I wouldn't necessarily run across. I mean, how many times? I'm not Snoop. How many times am I going to hang out with Martha Stewart? So I love those opportunities and just the variety that it brings on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I was just thinking about everything what you said before. Like outside of just doing all your amazing hosting on TV, whether it's in New York and LA, you wrote the book, which you mentioned in the intro, about losing isn't everything. And you also, in 2022, you finished your master's degree in public policy and administration following the growing video displays of racial injustice around the country. I feel like there is a pretty clear level of introspection that you carry around in your life. How does looking at the bigger picture of life impact the man you are today? Because just based off this entire conversation, I feel like it's pretty important for you.
Wow, that's a deep question. I don't know. I think so much of it comes, and I'm thinking of this in the moment, just from the upbringing I had. I talked about, I came from a family that struggled. And I think it's important to remember that. But by having this introspection, it allows you to have empathy for other people too. We see things happen on a day-to-day basis, and it's easy, especially in a world where we're inundated with so much negativity, to just kind of shut things out and shut people out and move on, rather than being empathetic for that person or the situation that they're in, or understanding that may not be the decision I would have made, but I can kind of see how they got there, even though it's the wrong path. And I think that's important for me, just because the way I want to live my life. For me, it's so important that when I put my head down at night, I'm not saying I do the right thing all the time or I'm the perfect human being by any means, but that I believe I got there in an honest way. If I got to that decision in an honest way, if I did what I thought was the right thing in the moment, and again, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I think that if I can do that, then I can feel good about myself no matter what the results are. It's if you cheated along the way, or maybe you treated someone poorly, or you did something improperly, even if it got me ahead, I couldn't enjoy that. That's just not who I am. So I think so much of it does go back there. And I think there's a bigger purpose. And it sounds stupid for a guy who does football scores for a living, but I think you can impact so many people's lives just with little deeds, and maybe it's somebody's having a bad situation in life. Again, we've all gone through it. You get fired or you lose a loved one or whatever. And maybe you just need to sit back on a Sunday and laugh about something stupid and goofy on a football field. By being able to provide that, that gives me at least a sense of not necessarily importance, but a sense of purpose. And I think that, and I do think it expands into the way I try and live my life and the volunteer stuff I do in the organizations I belong to. And who knows where this road goes? I mean, I think there's a bigger picture and a bigger purpose that down the road that, someday I'll go, that's why I did all those things way back when,
Yeah, I respect it a lot because I think a lot of people don't realize it in the moment, and eventually later on they reflect back. But it's pretty clear that you're realizing it throughout your life, and it's pretty cool to see that you're not forgetting about
I'm
any of these
trying.
people. Well, it's more evident than other people. I can tell you that much, and that's for sure. All right, last couple of things here before I wrap it up. Outside of work, I heard you are a big time traveler, and I should put a big emphasis on big. How big are we talking about, Curt? And where did this love for travel come from?
It used to be bigger. The pandemic slowed it down because we couldn't travel for a couple of years. And now I'm doing this cross country double duty thing. So my free time isn't as much, but I've been to 97 countries, slept on all 7 continents, with Antarctica being the big one. Spent 3 nights there, early 2000s. But it's just, I don't know. I think part of it comes from a little bit of what we were talking about. I have this curiosity about people. And I love meeting people and having conversations, which works well with a show where you're getting 5 or 6 different people on every day. And so when I travel, I get a chance to talk to people, but also like learn what their lives are like. And, one of the things people say, well, what do you learn about people when you travel? 2 things I tell young people in particular. I say travel because you learn more about yourself than you will about anybody else. Being halfway around the world, not being able to speak a language, being lost, having to get from point A to point B or just get some food will teach you how you deal with stressful situations. But the other thing is I've learned that everybody's trying to get along in life the best they can. And they're trying to provide for their family the best they can. And it may be in Italy, it may be in Tanzania, it may be in Bhutan. But whatever it is, I mean, you go to these places and you actually have conversations with people in whatever way you can with whatever language skills you do have. And you find out that that's what it is. And one of the most beautiful things for me is not only learning that, but like being in places where people don't worry about keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, okay, if I have enough for me, I have enough for me and my family. If I have, they have. or just being able to share moments. Like one of the great stories I always say, it's my Anthony Bourdain story. But I was in Tonga once, and I was staying at this place, and it won't get too boring, but I was the only place staying at this place, and they called it a resort, but it was a hut with no air conditioning, barely electricity, yada yada yada. I was the only person. So the guy that ran the place said, "Hey, I noticed you just sit here," and because I was writing my book at the time, so you just sit here and you write, and then you like have dinner. He's like, "I'm off tomorrow. Why don't you come by my house?" So okay, so it's no cars or anything. Just walk down the road on the island, and I went to his house, and he killed this little. Don't mean to offend anybody, but this little pig, and he put it in the dirt and roasted it in the ground. His mother-in-law, his sister-in-law, like his entire wife's family, all lived in that house. I was there, and when I say all day, I mean like 12 hours, all day, because you had to wait. I think it was like 6 or 8 hours for the pig to cook. But I just got to see them and know their family and just kind of experience that. And their whole thing was they didn't have internet. They didn't have TV, and it's not because it wasn't available. It's just like, it's not a big deal to them. And they were some of the happiest, most joyful people, and kind. I'm a stranger, and they brought me in their house just to show me the way that they live, and that had such a huge impact on me. But it's just a reminder that wherever you are, man, we get wrapped up in getting the new iPhone sometimes, and you just have to remember it's not about that at all.
Yep, kindness rules, and we have it better than most people, and we should always remember that.
Amen.
Yep. All right, Curt. Last question. I ask this to every guest. This is the NFL Spotlight Show. We love spotlighting people who deserve more recognition, more attention. It could be a player, a coach, an executive, a media person, or producer. Think outside the box, whoever you want. Who do you think deserves to be in this seat here in the future?
Well, I would say he deserves to have a spotlight have you shine the spotlight on him a little bit more, but he'll do it himself if you give him a chance. Jay Glazer. So I told you, I've known Jay for more than 30 years now. He's best man at my wedding, and I'm sure he'll tell you that story if you ever have him on. But Jay is one of those guys that he's the connective tissue between so many different worlds that people don't understand. You see him on Fox NFL Sunday, and he talks about this coach or this GM. And I mean, everybody in the league knows Jay. Everybody. And he's got a different relationship than any other insider. But then you go to his house and all of a sudden Sylvester Stallone is there, or Bret Michaels, or you're like, wait a minute, how do these people what is going on in these worlds? He's a unique individual. I think the more people learn about him, the more they'll love him.
Yeah, I've always respected Jay a lot. I mean, like you mentioned, he does a lot of different things, but his ability, just me being in the news industry, his ability to have a story and hold it until Sunday without it getting
Yeah.
out in age is one of the most incredible things that I've always been impressed by. And it shows the level of trust that he has with people around this league. And on top of it, all the other things that he does is wild and crazy. And we're all happy for him because now he's married and everything. So we'll definitely try to get Jay here on the show as well. But Curt,
Tell him I recommended him.
Yeah, I will. I will definitely do that. All right, Curt, I want to thank you for coming on over here, shedding a spotlight a little bit on your career, the journey, the path, everything you do. It is truly impressive. It's inspiring, and everything you said, I think people could take a little bit out of it as well to learn out of it. So thank you so much, Curt, and continued success with everything that you do.
Thank you, Ari, for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Special thanks to Curt Menefee for being our special spotlight guest here of the week. I mean, you guys heard the journey for him. I mean, it was not just all of a sudden he ended up on Fox on that desk. I mean, he took a bunch of different positions in many different cities, and at one point it felt like he got a bit emotional just looking back at all of it and reflecting on all of it. And of course, you also just heard some of the stories he's had on Fox, and of course, some other things he does around his life, which includes writing a book, and of course, how much he loves to travel. But Curt Menefee, one of the great hosts out there, and of course, the Fox pregame show is number one and probably will continue to be number one with that crew there every single week.